What do you really want in your life? Do you think everybody has a calling? We are all looking for the same thing. What inspires you? Can we heal from everything? How do we live an awakened life? Why do you think we're here as human beings? To say yes to life, you got to start saying yes to life experiences. Think for a minute about the worst mistake you've ever made. And imagine if you were forever defined by it. On this Super Soul Sunday, I'm joined by Shaka Senghor. You just had an aha there.
Yeah.
When he was 19 years old, Shaka was convicted of second-degree murder and spent 19 years in prison. 7 of those years in solitary confinement. Shaka says he takes full responsibility for pulling the trigger and taking a life. But today, we are looking at the whole of his experience. What your story says to me is that the power of love is transformative. Some may never see more than a convicted felon with dreads and tattoos. But during the next hour, put yourself for a moment in his shoes.
All I ever wanted was a fair chance to just be a human.
And ask, is it possible to earn true redemption? So what I would like to do is actually hear how it came to be that you, a 19-year-old young man, ended up in prison. So what was your life like growing up?
So growing up on the outside looking in, I always say we had that ideal looking family. Father who worked, my father was in the Air Force Reserves, and he also worked for the state. My mother was a stay-at-home mother.
Mm-hmm.
And
so you're middle-class black family.
Middle-class black family.
In Detroit.
In Detroit,
Mm-hmm.
East side of Detroit.
And when did it start to go astray?
So from the time I can remember, there was always this element in the household, which was the physical abuse.
Mm-hmm. Who being physically abused?
My mother.
Your mother being physically abused?
To us, her children.
Mm-hmm.
And my father being a partner in that whole culture. And back then, I mean, we grew up in a community where whoopings that's the norm.
Yeah, that's certainly how I grew up.
Right.
You get whipped if you for the slightest infraction.
Thing.
Don't
Right.
you remember?
Yeah, definitely.
Like you're just doing normal kid stuff.
I think the thing that probably left the deepest impression on me is one time I was coming home from school, and I was like the smart kid in the family, and so my grades was like the thing that I was most proud of. Mm-hmm. And so I came home super excited to...
How old are you?
I'm probably in the 4th grade, so I'm assuming like 8, 9, 8. I'm not sure yet, right. And I came in and she was at the kitchen sink washing dishes, and I was like, Ma, I got this score on my test. And she rolled around and threw a pot with like such force that it broke the tiles on the wall.
That's a life-shattering moment when you think about it.
Devastating.
That's a life-shattering moment when you think about being an 8-year-old or 9-year-old coming home and saying, Mom, look at my grades. Yeah. Did you ever find out what was she upset about?
I never knew. My mother was upset often about small things. And I mean, I later discovered a lot of things that happened to her. Yeah. And that's how I was able to get past that. Yeah. I was able to really step outside of the anger, the hurt, the resentment, and really just say what happened to her to make her. Yeah,
but you can't do that when you're 8. You're not even thinking about that when you're 8 or 9.
Because you just want to be loved and appreciated.
And hadn't you said, I want to be a doctor? Wasn't that your plan, to be a doctor?
Like that's all I've ever wanted to do, like growing up, like that was, and I think back to, like, why was that what I wanted to do? And I realized that I like nice people. Mm-hmm. And the doctor was always nice to me. Mm-hmm. And even when my mother would take me to the doctor, she was nice. And like, I'm like, if I'm a doctor, and she'll be nice. And, and so that, wow.
You just had an aha there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So, just wanted to be a doctor.
I get that. So, let me ask you this. Did you feel loved growing up?
I didn't feel like Like I was told, I do this because I love you, but it was always a whooping or a punishment.
Yeah. I mean, Shaka, I grew up like that too, where, if I were asked that question,
Yeah.
I would say no, I didn't feel love growing up. So you grew up like I grew up.
Yeah.
Shaka was raised as James White, one of 6 children in a blended family. His parents separated when he was 11 years old. Shaka says that's when everything changed. He lost interest in school, gave up his dream of becoming a doctor. He started acting out, and by the time he was 14, he ran away from home. He was soon recruited by an older drug dealer. Shaka's riveting new memoir, Righting My Wrongs, paints a heartbreaking picture of how vulnerable he truly was. You consciously, and you make this clear in Righting My Wrongs, you consciously chose the street life,
Yes.
the life of the streets.
Yes.
Why did you consciously choose a life of the streets?
Because in that space, I felt accepted. So leaving home, and I was around other broken, fragile young males that we banded together around our brokenness. And we just like, this is support. This is love. This is I got your back no matter what.
Because that's what gangs are they not?
So gangs are.
Being
right?
banded together around your brokenness.
Yeah.
Beautiful way to put it.
And so I started getting into like minor trouble, breaking in houses, stealing out stores, fights in school. And I'm always like shocked now when I look back that nobody saw the drop off. Like, how does a kid go from honor roll scholarship to barely performing or not even wanting to do the work that...
Yeah. One of the things that struck me is that you say time and again in here that nobody ever asks you what is wrong. Why are you behaving this way? Nobody ever stopped to say, maybe something's wrong. Maybe he's not well, or maybe something's going on in his life. Nobody ever did that. People just beat you and kept moving.
Yeah.
So time and again, I was thinking, where was the moral code? Because as a little boy who's in, striving to do well in school and has these dreams of becoming a doctor, you had a sense of what was right and what was wrong. What happened to the moral code?
The environment like chipped away at that. I was so naive.
Yeah. You
and
were
so-
a crack dealer by 14.
Yes, crack dealer and crack addict at 14.
Yeah. And that was also when you started to be sexualized and sexually abused.
Yep.
Women would sell their bodies to you for a piece of crack.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in that space, the thing is, it's a normalized behavior for young men in that space, and it's seen as this twisted rites of passage.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think it's so important to understand, and you make it very clear in Righting My Wrongs, is that the culture, the entire environment perpetuated this idea that your virility, your strength, your power was who had the most money, who had the most attention, and you got attention through being the bad guy.
Yeah, and when I look back now, you can just see like that's what the quest was, power.
Yeah.
And it became like your reputation becomes everything.
Yeah. One of my greatest lessons of the Oprah show, all those years interviewing thousands of people, was that I could see that there was a common denominator in our experience. And more than power, what people are looking for is validation.
Validation, yes.
They're looking to see that they matter. And what I see from your life in the streets, the street life, and I think what a lot of people need to understand when we're looking at what's going on in inner city neighborhoods with a lot of our youth is that's where your power comes from. That's where your validation comes from, right?
Like, do you matter to
Yeah.
somebody?
To somebody.
Somebody will know I'm here. Somebody will know I'm present. You will not ignore my existence on this earth. And just unfortunately, we haven't figured out how do you empower young men and women in communities where powerlessness is the norm.
Yeah. How come those young men and women, you included, don't get that the way to success, the open door to freedom is, education, is all the things that you later came to see for yourself when you were in prison. So what's missing in the neighborhoods that kids don't get that, oh, this isn't the way, but this is?
Yeah. So as a mentor,
Because at one time you did know it.
I
In the
didn't
fifth
know,
grade,
right?
you knew it.
Right, right. And it's believing it. And it's which dialogue do you really believe the most?
Yeah.
Do you believe that you are a bad person who will never accomplish anything in life and that this is your lot? Or do you believe that you're worthy of the abundance that the world is willing to bestow upon you if
Yeah.
you take these steps?
I get
But
that.
it's hard to see that through the pain, through the trauma, through
And what's being reflected to you daily in
daily
your neighborhood, in your life.
in your
I get that.
neighborhood, in your household,
In your household.
amongst your friends. That mentality is so, like, one of the things that
Oh, okay, I got aha here. So it's very easy for people who are sitting back in their, environments, whatever that is. It's very easy to say, well, look at me, look at what I'm doing, because they're not walking in your shoes. They're not in that neighborhood. They're not in that house. They don't see what the culture is.
yeah.
And
You have to see it. You have to listen.
coming up, in that moment that you realized that you had taken another man's life, what did you feel? And later,
I am not black.
in this week's Super Soul Short, visionary artist and activist Prince E challenges us to see beyond the surface of our skin to the heart of what makes us human.
When I grew up, it wasn't cool to be smart. So a lot of times I downplayed that.
Looking back now, Shaka Senghor says he once believed these streets were the only place he could find connection, protection, and even a sense of power, despite all of the dangers.
I actually got shot on the corner down here. Just the energy over here reminds me of like a dark period in my life.
Let's start with the day you were shot.
Yeah. So I'll never forget the morning. It's March 8th, 1990. A couple of days prior, I had an argument with an old girlfriend. She told her boyfriend, and he pulled up. I had never seen this guy a day in my life. And we had a little back and forth, and I'm like, well, get out the car, we can fight. And instead of getting out, he just started shooting and shot me 3 times. And I remember I ran into this lady's house, and she was just like, no, don't come in here, don't come in here, don't come in here. And then I ran out the side door. And then a guy on the block who I knew, he knew us from selling drugs, whatever, he came out with a gun and, kind of escorted me back to safety.
It sounds like a war zone,
Yeah, so he drove me to the hospital, got me in, and they pretty much pulled the bullets out, patched me up, was like, you go get this prescription and you can go back home. So the next day I was back in the same neighborhood on crutches, no intervention, nobody to say, you're going to carry all these feelings, this fear, this paranoia, this shouldn't have happened to you. And I began to just like internalize all these different things, all the conversations of, worthlessness, not feeling like my life mattered or not feeling like I could be safe. It was like, it went from this fear to like this anger and like this sense that I will never allow anybody else to hurt me. And so from that point forward, my gun was never out of my reach. And I became fixated with that. With like, if a conflict arises,
You have your gun.
I got my gun and I'm shooting first. And so
At 17.
at 17. And so 14 months later, I was DJing a party and an altercation broke out at the party. And so we ended up leaving. And we're coming back down the street and a car pulls up. And then the guy called me from the back seat and I realized that it was a high spender. He would come multiple times a day from the suburbs. And he usually came and spent, $300-400 every trip. But we had an agreement, like you never bring anybody to my home. And on this night, he was with two guys, neither of which I knew. And that's how me and David ended up getting into an argument. Because he was like, well, just make the transaction. And I was like, you don't have nothing to do with this. So we started arguing. It was kind of like, you know, just get off the block. Like, y'all got to go. And they just refused to leave. So
you got three guys in a car. They're trying to buy drugs. You don't know two of them, so you are saying, I'm not going to do this because I think maybe one of you are the police.
Right. Now this argument has escalated to like high level now. And I pulled a pistol out, and David opens the car door. And when he opened his car door, that triggered the fear of being shot or being hurt. And I just turned and shot multiple times. And I immediately knew it in my soul, like that I had just caused this man's death. It was just like this darkness. It was just like this is it. Like you've taken somebody's life. And then the kid in me was like, I just wanted to run away.
And in that moment that you realized that you had taken another man's life, what did you feel?
I felt like everything else was a facade. I felt like it was fake. It no longer felt, the reputation no longer mattered. It's just like, this is real, and I was scared. Like I felt scared.
Yeah. You say here, I didn't know where the shots I fired had landed, but something in my soul told me a terrible thing had happened. In that moment, I knew the guy had died. Yeah. You know what's interesting? That struck me in your Writing My Wrongs memoir is that I could tell that you were a nice guy. You were a good person. Because even when you were getting in all the trouble, this is how I could tell, that the moment you were going to kill yourself, there was a moment before this happened. Can you tell us about that moment?
Yeah, so me and my friends, we were just sitting up one night, we were drinking, and I was like, I asked him a question like, what if I decided to kill myself? And in that moment, it was a cry for help from my friends who probably couldn't help themselves, but they just thought I was playing because I was like the tough guy, the street savvy cat. And so when I got home, I allowed that thought to take root in a way that it started growing. You know, I'm like, wow, what would happen if I did kill myself? Like, would they finally care? Like, would my mother really like care at that point, you know? And so I went home and I had a shotgun and I was like, I'm gonna do it, you know? Because the feeling of not being loved by the woman who gave birth to you, I wanted that to go away. And I wanted that final moment to be for her to say, wow, he was special and I should have loved him, but I didn't. So
You were going to kill yourself so your mother would finally say, I'm sorry.
yeah. And so
I should have loved you more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I thought about it, you know, I had the shotgun, and then I just like thought about my nephew, you know, what would that be like for my nephew or my family to like see that level of devastation, you know? Because my nephew, he used to climb down the stairs like every morning and wake me up to get cereal.
Your 2-year-old nephew.
Yeah.
Well, that's when I knew that there was, in that story, something redeemable, that you are a human being worthy of redemption, because in the moment of your greatest pain, when you're thinking, I want to kill myself just so I can end this pain, and so maybe then my mother will love me, you think, I don't want to do that because my 2-year-old nephew, who comes down the stairs every morning, will find me here. And what will that do to him? Your ability to love and care for your nephew is what kept you alive in that moment. Wow. So you weren't so hardened that you had no love.
Care, right.
Yeah. You had enough. What made me like open my heart to your story is that in spite of everything that had been done to you as a little boy, makes me want to cry, that you still didn't want to do that to another little boy.
Yeah.
Coming up, after 6 years in prison, Shaka receives a life-changing letter.
But she wanted me to know, like, the hurt that I had caused. But she went on to say that she loved me. And, like, I didn't know what to do with that part.
When I entered prison, I was bitter, I was angry, I was violent, and I made it up in my mind that day that I had to be a lion, and I refused to be a sheep.
So this is what I don't understand. Okay, so you're in prison and you decide that you're gonna have the same kind of attitude in prison of dominance and control that you did on the street. Did that work for you?
Initially,
It did.
when I first went in, I had no expectations of ever getting out. And I was 19. I had been sentenced to a total of 17 to 40 years in prison. At 19, you can't even see 2 weeks down the line, let alone 17 years down the line.
Yeah.
So I rebelled from the very first moment. I attempted to escape. I got into physical altercations with other guys.
Yeah.
It's a very violent culture, very broken culture. And in that environment, it's better to be feared than to be fearful.
Mm-hmm.
And what I knew about myself every day was that I was willing to die or kill for what I believed in.
What did you believe in? What was your belief?
It was so distorted that the belief was like survival of the fittest.
Okay,
It was just
I get
straight primal, barbaric. This reputation that I brought from the street now lands in prison,
Yeah.
and you realize very quickly that there's this battle where everybody's juggling for who's going to be the man.
Yeah. In spiritual law, which we talk a lot about on this show, it's a culture, it's a broken culture that feeds your brokenness.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and reinforces everything that you've been taught negative about yourself. And that becomes, the more negative you are, the more validated you are in the environment.
In that environment.
In that environment.
Yeah.
And so it's the complete opposite of
What life is.
what life is.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a different culture.
Which, I want to stop you here because I think that's what people need to understand. First of all, 90% of the people are coming out at some point.
At some point.
And we are creating these prisons and institutions where there is no sense of rehabilitation.
Nothing.
But you go into this world where you are consistently dehumanized to be punished for the dehumanization that you brought to someone else. Mm-hmm. And people come out worse than they were when they went in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. While serving his 19-year sentence, Shaka spent a total of 7 years in solitary confinement as punishment for assaulting a guard and other inmates, attempting to escape, and many other violations. And explain what that feels like the first time you're taken to solitary confinement and what that's like.
So the prison is its own other world. And solitary confinement is a subculture of this world. It has its own language, it has its own rhythm that's very different from general population.
You're still on a row though, but you're next to other people. You're just
Right.
alone in your cell.
You're just
That's
alone
what I
in
mean.
your cell.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that environment, the level of mental illness in there is unbelievable. And
People screaming all night.
Screaming all night, beating on lockers, throwing feces and urine on each other.
Because you're in solitary confinement, you're allowed 1 hour a day.
1 hour a
out
day.
on the block, is it called?
So it's basically like dog kennels. And when they come to get you from the cell, they cuff you up and the cell is attached to a dog leash. And they walk you down the tier, take you outside, put you in a dog kennel. So you get access to that 5 times a week. It's a very cold, indifferent, barbaric environment.
And in that cold, indifferent, bizarre, out of touch with our reality environment, your transformation begins.
Yeah.
While behind bars, Shaka had begun a journey to discover his true self. He became fascinated by books written by Malcolm X and Donald Goines, and spent hours writing and reflecting on his past. Then, 6 years into his sentence, he received a letter from a woman named Nancy, the godmother of David, the man he had killed. Nancy's letter became the genesis of Shaka's transformation. What did she say to you in that letter?
So she started off telling me who David was. He had a 10-month-old son that he never got a chance to see his first birthday. He had a daughter who was struggling greatly. But she wanted me to know, like, the hurt that I had caused, the devastation I caused their family. But she went on to say, despite that she loved me. I didn't know what to do with that part. You know, and then she said she forgives me. Like, I just couldn't imagine how this woman could love me knowing that I had caused her and her family so much devastation.
Were you able to receive that at the time?
Mentally. So mentally, I got it. But on that deeper level, it was the seed. In hindsight, looking back and watching the incremental growth, like that was the seed that was kind of blossoming.
Because the first time you received that letter, it let you know what?
It let me know that I was redeemable.
And wasn't that the first time, too, that you came to understand that this was a life you had taken? That this was somebody's life, somebody's son, somebody's brother, somebody's father that you had taken, and that up until then, you really kind of, in your distorted thinking, blamed him for being in the wrong place, blamed him for saying whatever it is he said to you, and so you felt justified in firing those shots.
Yeah, it was my way of excusing away the behavior.
Yeah.
And of not taking responsibility. And so the humanizing of who he was, because in my mind, there was no face, there was no father, there was no brother, there was no son, there was no friend that makes people laugh. He was just a person who caused me to mess up my life. That's it.
He caused you to
mess up my life.
Wow.
So it did two things. It humanized David, but also went into this different type of funk.
Because now you fully realize what you've done.
realize what I've done.
Yeah, got that. It cracked you, but it didn't open you up.
Right.
Yeah. Coming up, so the epiphany comes in solitary confinement. Your son writing you that letter was the beginning of your awakening.
That was the awakening.
It was your born again moment.
Yeah.
And later,
Isn't it funny how no baby is born racist, yet every baby cries when they hear the cries of another?
a Super Soul short on connection, perception, and the labels that were created to divide us. While Shaka served his time in prison, he tried to stay connected to his young son, Jay, through writing. They would also outline their hands on paper to send to one another. And then in one letter, his son's words would finally break Shaka open. So the epiphany comes in solitary confinement.
I was waiting on mail call, which is, and you're in solitary confinement, is absolutely the most important part of the day outside of eating. And largely because you're hoping that somebody just thought about you and somebody cared about you. And this particular day, I got a few letters, and I got one from my son, my oldest son, Jay.
How old was he at the time?
Around about 11.
11.
Yeah. When I opened the letter, everything, all the street savviness, the prison toughness, like it just crumbled to the ground. Because for the first time, I was seeing myself through the eyes of a child I helped bring into this world. And I read the letter, and he said, "My mother told me while you was in prison."
Tell me what the whole letter said. Dear Dad.
Dear Dad, my mother told me you was in prison for murder. Dear Dad, don't murder anymore. Jesus watches what you do. Pray to him and he'll forgive your sins. That part is what just shattered everything. It was like, I can't, whatever I do, if I never get out of prison, I refuse for that to be the legacy for my child. Like I couldn't go through the rest of my life with him, that being the final way that he sees me. And it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking on so many levels. It was the first time that I actually even was able to look at myself as this monster in my child's eyes.
You certainly knew you were in there for murdering someone. And your son saying, I heard you're in prison for murder, is that what did it?
That was part of it, but it was the other part, that Jesus watches what you do.
Jesus watches what you do.
And for this child to have this view of life, of good and bad, evil, and I'm being placed in this category where I'm not what a father is to a son. I'm not a hero. I'm not the provider. I'm not a role model. And
Now what's amazing to me is how could you possibly thought you were before?
because the abnormal is normalized in the space that I came from.
Okay.
You know, you talk to guys that hustle in the street, what are you hustling for? Hustling to take care of my family. I gotta get this money so I can make sure I provide for my family. I gotta
Wow.
protect the block because I gotta make sure my family is good. So it's distorted. Everything is turned upside down.
Yeah.
You know, in the hood, the bad guy's the hero.
But your son writing you that letter was the beginning of
That
your
was the
awakening.
That was the
It
awakening.
was your born again moment.
Yeah. That was the moment when I decided that I would never go back to the darkness and that I had to find my light and that I owed it to him to find my light.
What your story says to me is that the power of love is transformative because your love for your son and your desire to be better came from not wanting your son to have that as his only perception of his father as somebody who was in jail for murder.
Yeah.
Coming up, how do you emerge in a society that's so unforgiving? Since Shaka's release from prison in 2010, he has been a vocal advocate for criminal justice reform.
When you look at prison in our society, we don't talk about the human side and the human element.
He mentors kids in his community, teaches classes at the University of Michigan, and has earned a fellowship from the MIT Media Lab. At the heart of his work is raising the collective consciousness that every criminal should not be defined by their past mistakes, and redemption is possible. You are an anomaly. You have been able to transform your life, but based upon everything you've shared here today and what's going on in the prison system, it's not about reform. It's not about change. It's not about transformation. It's not about rehabilitation. So people come out worse than they were when they went in, for the most part. It's what you said. It's what you're going to do with that time in that cell. But that's up to each individual to decide that. And so hard when the whole environment does not lead you to that space. So how do we as a culture, as a society, then change that and be able to move forward?
I think the first thing that we have to do is acknowledge that we're wrong. That we've just got this thing wrong. Like the system is wrong.
I would agree with you.
You have, at any given time, over 2 million people incarcerated, millions of families impacted. And the reality is the majority of men and women are coming home. And we have a conscious choice as human beings, what kind of men and women we want to come home. Do we want them to come out more predatory, more barbaric, more inhumane? Or do we want them to come out and reintegrate into society as taxpaying citizens who have made a poor decision and who can now move on with their life?
Yeah.
And I know that people think I'm an anomaly. I don't personally think that because I see men and women who have transformed their lives. They just haven't figured out how do they re-emerge in a society that's so unforgiving. That's the thing. It's like, how do you emerge? And it wasn't easy for me.
Oh, that's a powerful tweet. How do you
Yeah.
emerge in a society that's so unforgiving? Well, that's true.
Yeah.
Because everybody's just standing in judgment. You're right. Whatever you've done in the past, we're going to hold that to you. That's why people
the
want
rest
to
of your
know
life.
what your rap sheet is and what did you do and what it was for, and
So unless you have that personal commitment, that deeper transformation, because it's more than just, hey, I just want to get out of here and I want to do the right thing.
You must be born again.
You have to be born again.
You must be
Otherwise,
born
you're not going to survive the onslaught that you're going to be faced with.
Yeah.
And I faced it. So where I went in and did an interview and was like, should I get the job? And then the higher ups are like, well, he's second-degree murder. I don't feel comfortable in his workspace. Went to rent an apartment, and they was like, as long as you have a felony, you can't rent here. I'm like, I can't take the felony off my record. It's there. It's there. It's never going to go away. So basically, they were saying you're never going to be worthy to live here. And so those barriers, they're there, you know, and the reality is we can fix that. Those things are fixable. Mm-hmm. Like somebody having decent housing and an opportunity to be employed, those are fixable things. And we just haven't done it.
So now what do you see as your calling, Shaka? What's your calling?
To raise awareness that, you know, the young men and women in our community, they are redeemable, they're valuable, that the men and women inside prison are worthy of a human touch, and that we can, you know, with just a little bit of hope and love, like we can transform millions of lives. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's my life's work, is to talk into those spaces that makes people a little bit uncomfortable.
Coming up, forgiveness is, complete that sentence, forgiveness is. Plus, in this week's Super Soul Short,
Who would you be if the world never gave you a label?
spoken word artist Prince E imagines a world without labels. Forgiveness is, complete that sentence, forgiveness is.
Freeing yourself from angers that stand in the way of your growing as a human being.
How are you able to forgive yourself?
By stepping outside of myself and really seeing the little boy who is born with goodness. And that's been the hardest part of my journey, is forgiving myself about the murder. I've been able to forgive myself about a lot of stuff, but that part has been hard.
Mm-hmm. I know you in the book, you write your victim, David, a letter. Yeah. And you did that for, you wanted to say.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I'm sorry, like that night I made that decision. And I wanted to say it to myself, like that I made that decision. You know?
He didn't make you make that decision.
He made me make that decision, that I myself was responsible.
Redemption is?
Being given a second chance to prove who you are authentically. As humans, we're all capable of making a poor decision, but we're fully capable of moving beyond those decisions and doing something meaningful with our lives despite that, and not being held hostage by it. And, you know, I think about that word often when I encountered obstacles. And all I've just ever wanted was a fair chance to just be a human. And to me, that's what redemption represents. Just like, just give me a fair chance to be a human.
Thank you. Very moving to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Really. Thank you. In this week's Super Soul Short, a powerful message by spoken word artist Prince E. This visionary filmmaker challenges the judgments attached to the color of our skin and imagines the freedom to be seen for who we really are.
I am not black. I mean, that's what the world calls me, but it's not me. I didn't come out of my mother's womb saying, hey, everybody, I'm black. No, I was taught to be black. And you were taught to call me that, along with whatever you call yourself. It's just a label. See, from birth, the world force feeds us these labels. And eventually, we all swallow them. We digest and accept the labels, never, ever doubting them. But there's one problem. Labels are not you, and labels are not me. Labels are just labels. But who we truly are is not skin deep. See, when I drive my car, no one would ever confuse the car for me. Forgive me, but I fail to see the logic or pride in defining myself or judging another by the cars we drive. Because who we truly are is found inside. I'm not here to lecture. I just want to ask one question. Who would you be if the world never gave you a label? Never gave you a box to check? Would you be white, black, Mexican, Asian, Native American, Middle Eastern, Indian? No, we would be one. We would be together. No longer living in the era of calling human beings black people or white people. These labels that will forever blind us from seeing a person for who they are, but instead seeing them through the judgmental, prejudicial, artificial filters of who we think they are. And when you let an artificial label define yourself, then my friend, you have chosen smallness over greatness and minimized yourself, confined and divided yourself from others. And it is an undeniable fact that where there is division, there will be conflict, and conflict starts wars. Therefore, every war has started over labels. It's always us versus them. So the answer to war, racism, sexism, and every other ism is so simple that every politician has missed it. It's the labels. We must rip them off. Isn't it funny how no baby is born racist, yet every baby cries when they hear the cries of another? No matter the gender, culture, or color, proving that deep down we were meant to connect and care for each other. That is our mission, and that is not my opinion. That is the truth in a world that has sold us fiction. Please listen, labels only distort our vision, which is why half of those watching this will dismiss it or feel resistance and conflicted. But just remember, so did the caterpillar before it broke through its shell and became the magnificent butterfly. Well, these labels are our shells, and we must do the same thing so we can finally spread our wings. Human beings were not meant to be slapped with labels like groceries and supermarkets. DNA cannot be regulated by the FDA. We were meant to be free, and only until we remove them all and stop living and thinking so small will we be free to see ourselves and each other for who we truly are.